Take a deep breath. Can you feel it? That subtle, unmistakable crispness carried on the morning breeze. September has arrived. It is one of the great thresholds of the calendar, a bridge suspended between the memory of summer's fiery abundance and the quiet, reflective stillness of the winter yet to come. For those of us who live with our hands in the soil, September is not an ending. It is a beginning. It is a sacred and fleeting window of opportunity. Right now, on this spinning blue marble we call home, a beautiful planetary symmetry is unfolding. In the Northern Hemisphere, we watch the sun sink a little lower in the sky each day, feeling the soil gradually cool as we prepare our beds for frost. In the Southern Hemisphere, fellow gardeners feel the earth waking beneath their feet, watching the soil warm as spring begins its joyful return. Two halves of one heart, breathing in and breathing out, connected by the simple and ancient act of planting. But here in the north, we are racing against a silent, invisible countdown. Agricultural science knows this biological boundary as the Persephone period. Named after the Greek goddess of the underworld, it refers to the time of year when daylight falls below 10 hours. When that threshold is crossed, something profound happens in the plant kingdom. Even when the air still feels warm, even when the sun continues to shine brightly, the lack of usable light energy means plant growth slows to an almost complete standstill. That is why the purpose of September planting in the north is not to grow a crop all the way to maturity in winter darkness. The goal is to establish a strong root system and build a resilient canopy of leaves before the Persephone period draws its curtain across the land. And sometimes, being late by only a single week changes everything. The mathematics of winter catches up with us. A harvest may be delayed not by a few days, but by months, with plants seemingly frozen in time until the returning spring sun wakes them again. It makes me think about the seasons of our own lives. We often look toward darker periods with fear. But what if approaching darkness were not an enemy? What if it were simply a deadline for preparation? What if our seasons of transition were opportunities to sink our roots deeper into what truly sustains us, so that when our own Persephone periods arrive, we are already anchored? Today, I want you to walk this path with me as we explore 12 extraordinary crops that ask for our trust, our effort, and our hope this September. We will look closely at the science happening beneath the soil, and perhaps, while doing so, discover some of the timeless wisdom the earth has been trying to teach us about ourselves. 1. Garlic, the silent crucible of the cold. Let us begin with an act of quiet, long-term faith. Garlic. Planting garlic in late September is a strategic investment in a future that may still be nearly 10 months away. To produce a magnificent head filled with individual cloves, garlic must pass through a physiological process known as vernalization. The clove needs to experience at least 2 cold months below 40 degrees Fahrenheit, or roughly 4.4 degrees Celsius. Plant garlic too early, while the late summer soil is still warm, and the plant can be deceived. It spends its precious reserves of stored sugars pushing tender green leaves above the soil. Then, when winter's deep freeze inevitably arrives, those soft, watery leaves are damaged by frost. The clove loses valuable reserves and can become weak, vulnerable, and more susceptible to rot. But wait until late September, when the soil has cooled and the garlic responds with remarkable restraint. It remains hidden beneath the earth, sending strong, fibrous roots outward into the darkness, firmly anchoring itself while the growing tip rests and waits for winter to perform its work. The cold is not garlic's enemy. The cold is its crucible. Without those freezing temperatures, the clove will not properly divide. Instead of developing into a full head of separate, flavorful cloves, it may remain a single, round, onion-like bulb. Garlic needs the bitter cold to trigger the hormonal transformation that divides one simple body into a crown of individual cloves. And isn't that an extraordinary metaphor for our own lives? How often do we suddenly find ourselves in a season of coldness, isolation, or absolute darkness? We feel buried, forgotten, frozen. We desperately want warmth to return. We want to push our green shoots toward the sunlight before we are truly ready. Yet the earth quietly whispers, "Trust the cold." Some of the deepest transformations of the human spirit cannot happen in the easy, superficial warmth of summer. Sometimes we need winter to reveal different strengths within us, breaking one simple perspective into a complex and resilient crown of wisdom. So when you press that garlic clove 2 inches into the soil this month, with the basil plate facing downward and each clove spaced 4 to 6 inches apart, remember what you are really doing. You are not burying it so that it can die. You are planting it so that it can be transformed. What winter are you facing right now that may actually become the very catalyst you need to discover a hidden depth within yourself? 2. Carrot, sweetness born of frozen ground. Next, we sow a seed containing a remarkably sweet secret, the carrot. September is a golden opportunity to direct sow varieties intended for fall and winter harvest. When temperatures begin to fall and the first frost gently touches the garden, a remarkable survival mechanism awakens inside the carrot's orange root. The plant knows that water freezes, and when water freezes, it expands, creating sharp ice crystals capable of rupturing plant cells from within and turning once solid tissue into mush. To defend itself, the carrot begins rapidly converting its stored starches into simple sugars. Those sugars dissolve into the water inside the carrot's cells and act like a powerful natural antifreeze. They lower the freezing point of the liquid inside the root, helping the carrot remain alive, crisp, and vibrant, even while surrounded by frozen ground. For us gardeners, that biological defense becomes a culinary miracle. A carrot harvested during the relatively warm days of September can be perfectly pleasant. But pull that same kind of carrot through the frozen crust of December soil, and you encounter an entirely different vegetable. It can become remarkably sweet, almost candy-like, with that sweetness created by its struggle against the cold. But if you want to experience that transformation, you must respect the nature of the carrot. Carrots should not be started in seedling trays. Their identity is built around one long, singular taproot. The moment that young root reaches the bottom of a plastic cell or becomes bent during transplanting, it can split and branch, creating a distorted, multi-legged carrot, rather than the straight root you hope to harvest. Instead, sow carrots directly into loose, stone-free soil, about ½ an inch deep. And because carrot seeds can be painfully slow to germinate, sometimes taking as long as 3 weeks, the soil surface must remain consistently damp. One classic method is to lay a wooden plank directly over the seeded row to hold moisture in the soil. Check beneath it every day and remove the plank as soon as those first delicate green threads begin emerging. Carrots remind us that sweetness is not always created by comfort. Sometimes the sweetest qualities within us, our empathy, resilience, tenderness, and quiet capacity for joy, only awaken when we are forced to survive the frost. The sugar within our souls becomes a defense against being shattered by the coldness of the world. So if you are feeling the chill of a difficult season, do not despair. Your starch may simply be turning into sugar. You may be becoming sweeter than you ever could have become beneath an endless summer sun. Have you ever noticed that some of the kindest and most resilient people you know are also the people who have survived the coldest winters of life? 3. Beets, the hard choice of thinning our third crop, brings us face to face with one of the most difficult and counterintuitive lessons in the garden. Beets. If we want sweet, plump roots before deep winter arrives, we need to sow them early in September, roughly 8 weeks before the expected first frost. Beets are rich in potassium, an important nutrient that helps the plant regulate water and develop strong cellular tissue. But the most fascinating thing about beets may actually be hidden inside what we casually call their seed. Look closely at a beet seed, and you are not really looking at one individual seed. You are looking at a multi-germ seed ball, a small, dry, cork-like fruit containing a cluster of 2 to 6 genetically distinct seeds. That means when you sow one beet seed ball, you rarely receive one lonely seedling. Instead, a miniature forest of sprouts may emerge from exactly the same spot. They are brothers and sisters occupying one tiny patch of earth. Leave all of them there, and soon they begin competing intensely for sunlight, moisture, space, and nutrients. Their roots tangle, their leaves crowd one another, and instead of beautiful, juicy, rounded magenta beets, you can end up with thin, woody, stringy roots. To save the crop, you must do something that often feels cruel. You must thin them. When the seedlings reach roughly 3 to 4 inches tall, you walk along the row, look down at those brave little leaves you worked so hard to grow, and remove the weaker seedlings until only one strong plant remains about every 3 inches. For many beginning gardeners, this feels terrible. It seems as though you are destroying life that you intentionally created, but refusing to thin can condemn the entire crowded row to starvation. Sometimes, to allow one plant to reach its full potential, the others must be removed. That is the law of the beet, and it carries a profound lesson into our modern lives. We live in a culture constantly telling us that we can have everything, accomplish everything, and somehow be everything for everyone. So we scatter our energy like unthinned beet seedlings. We commit ourselves to countless projects, relationships, ambitions, and obligations, hoping that somehow all of them will thrive together. But our emotional and mental soil is not infinite. When we refuse to thin our commitments, our own lives become overcrowded. We become stressed, exhausted, woody, and hollow. Thinning is not failure. Sometimes, thinning is an act of love. It is having the courage to say, I cannot cultivate everything. I must decide what matters most, what truly aligns with my purpose, and I must release what does not, so that whatever remains has enough room to become beautiful, deep, and whole. What part of your life has become so crowded that it is asking you to step in, make the difficult choice, and gently thin what no longer needs to remain? 4. Radish, speed, balance, and the danger of rushed pressure. If beets represent the slow and patient creation of space, our fourth crop represents something very different: the dizzying speed of life. The radish. Radishes are the sprinters of the vegetable world. Plant a common red salad radish in the cool, moist soil of September, and it can travel from dry seed to crisp, peppery harvest in only 20 to 35 days. That speed makes radishes incredibly satisfying, especially for beginning gardeners who need a quick success to build their confidence. But do not mistake speed for simplicity. The radish is almost like a sensitive instrument, constantly measuring the pressure of its surroundings. Radishes thrive in cool weather, ideally below 80 degrees Fahrenheit, and they require a dependable, uninterrupted supply of moisture. If a sudden heat wave hits, or if the soil remains dry for 3 days before being flooded with water in an attempt to compensate, the radish can respond immediately. Under stress, rapid cellular division within the root begins to slow, and the plant starts producing higher concentrations of compounds known as glucosinolates. These compounds function as natural chemical defenses, creating a bitter, sulfurous shield intended to discourage pests. And what does that mean for us? A radish that can become woody, hollow, and intensely spicy, sometimes so peppery that it seems to burn the mouth. Its harsh environment has changed its character. Compacted soil creates another problem. If the earth is too dense, or if the seedlings are not thinned to at least an inch apart, the root simply does not have enough room to expand. Instead of creating that beautiful round red globe, the plant may pour its energy into thin, hairy roots that never develop into the radish you expected. Our own world often celebrates speed in much the same way. We wear busyness like a badge of honor. We race through our days, stacking project upon project, skipping rest, ignoring our basic needs, convincing ourselves that moving faster must mean succeeding more. But the radish warns us about the cost of constant pressure. When our environment becomes relentlessly stressful, when the soil around us is dry of emotional support and compacted by obligation, we can become woody too. We lose tenderness. We lose sweetness. We lose our ability to experience joy. And sometimes we develop a bitter, peppery shell, snapping at the very people we love, simply because we are struggling to survive. Speed can be beautiful, but only when speed is supported by balance. You cannot force a life into beauty by rushing it. You can only support it through steady, gentle care. Are you moving through this season so quickly, carrying so much pressure, that you risk becoming bitter instead of remaining crisp, tender, and sweet? 5. Spinach, the wisdom of thermodormancy. Our fifth crop teaches the exquisite wisdom of knowing when to say no. Spinach. Spinach is one of the great cool weather powerhouses of the garden. It is so remarkably cold-hardy that it can survive temperatures falling to 15 or even 10 degrees Fahrenheit without protection. Sown in September, spinach can provide rich, iron-dense leaves through the winter. Cover it with a simple low tunnel, and it can rest beneath the snow before bursting into new growth when the February sun begins whispering warmth back into the earth. But try planting spinach while the soil still holds the intense heat of summer, and you may run directly into a biological wall. When soil temperature rises above 80 degrees Fahrenheit, or roughly 26.6 degrees Celsius, spinach seed can enter a state known as thermodormancy. It is essentially a genetic lock, a physiological refusal to germinate. To the gardener who continues watering and waiting, the seed may appear dead. But it is not dead, it is behaving intelligently. The seed recognizes that if it germinates in the baking heat of late summer, the delicate leaves of this cool season plant may immediately wilt, dry, and die. So the seed chooses sleep. It remains sealed within its protective shell, keeping metabolic activity at a minimum and waiting patiently for the soil to cool into its preferred range of approximately 45 to 68 degrees Fahrenheit. Only then, when its environment becomes suitable for survival, does the seed unlock its potential and begin reaching toward the light. How often do we resist that same wisdom in our own lives? We are obsessed with constant action. We feel as though every second must be productive. We must create, achieve, move forward, improve, and prove that we are progressing. So we try to force our dreams to germinate inside environments that are toxic, overheated by stress, or simply not ready to support them. And when nothing happens, we blame ourselves. We begin believing we are dead seeds. But perhaps you are not dead. Perhaps you are simply experiencing your own form of thermodormancy. Perhaps something deep within you understands that the environment around you is currently too hot, too chaotic, or too demanding for healthy growth. It is all right to wait. It is all right to remain dormant for a season, protecting the small spark inside you until the soil of your life cools, until peace returns, until there is stability and enough room to breathe. Waiting is not always laziness. Sometimes, waiting is a biological strategy for survival. Is there something in your life you are desperately trying to force into growth when what you truly need may be rest, patience, and a cooler, gentler season? 6. Kale, humbly forgiving, sweeter with struggle. Our sixth companion may be one of the most resilient and forgiving friends you can grow in the garden. Kale. I have always had a deep affection for kale, and I plant it every September because it behaves like an extraordinary survivor. While other crops on this list may demand precise timing, careful watering, or constant attention, kale is remarkably humble. It germinates in the warm soil of late summer without much complaint. It handles transplanting beautifully, and it seems perfectly content whether you direct sow it or begin it in a tray. Kale is the crop that can forgive the gardener who reaches it last, but its true glory does not reveal itself until winter begins arriving. Kale can remain outdoors without protection in temperatures around 15 degrees Fahrenheit. Then a hard frost strikes, and something fascinating begins happening inside those ruffled leaves. Kale naturally contains sulfur compounds that contribute to its characteristic bitter, slightly medicinal flavor. But as freezing air threatens to turn the water inside those leaves into ice, kale responds much like the carrot. It begins filling its tissues with sugars. Those sugars do more than act as antifreeze. They also interact with the compounds responsible for bitterness, changing the flavor of the leaf. That is why kale harvested during the baking heat of August may feel tough, bitter, and difficult to chew, while kale harvested in November, after several hard frosts, can be tender, sweet, and extraordinarily delicious. The struggle changes it. The freeze, the very thing that appears capable of destroying it, becomes part of what makes it beautiful. How many of us have lived through seasons of profound struggle, feeling the freezing winds of grief, betrayal, disappointment, or failure moving through our lives? In those moments, we often become defensive. We become hard. We become bitter. We wonder why we have been asked to endure so much cold. But through its ruffled leaves, the earth quietly whispers, "Let the frost do its work." The struggles we survive do not have to leave us harder than before. If we allow those experiences to settle deeply within us, if we process pain with grace, those trials can sometimes neutralize bitterness instead. They can soften arrogance, They can reduce judgment. They can smooth our sharpest edges and leave behind someone more tender, compassionate, and understanding. Life's freeze can make us soft in the most beautiful sense of that word, humbled but still undefeated. Can you look back on one frost from your own past and recognize that somehow, through the pain, it removed part of your bitterness and made you a gentler human being? 7. Lettuce, the rhythms of boundaries and bolting. Our seventh crop brings us into the delicate dance of boundaries. Lettuce. September can be a magnificent month for sowing lettuce. Whether you choose a romaine blend or a classic bib variety, lettuce thrives in the cool, gentle temperatures of early autumn, ideally around 50 to 68 degrees Fahrenheit. Mild sunlight and moist soil help keep those leaves tender, crisp, and sweet. But lettuce has a strict boundary that it refuses to ignore. When late summer heat lingers, and daytime temperatures repeatedly rise above 75 degrees Fahrenheit, the plant may suddenly change its priorities. It stops focusing on producing leaves. The center begins shooting upward. This process is known as bolting. Bolting is the plant's frantic, stress-driven attempt to reproduce before conditions become unbearable. As the central stalk races upward to create flowers and seeds, leaves become thinner, and the plant's vascular system fills with bitter, milky white latex sap. Once lettuce has fully bolted, the transformation is essentially complete. The leaves can become intensely bitter, tough, and rubbery, making them unpleasant to eat. The plant has sacrificed its sweetness in response to stress. That is why successful September lettuce often needs protection from lingering heat. Planting near taller crops can provide partial shade, while a floating row cover can help shield plants from intense midday sun. And keeping the soil consistently damp helps prevent the dry stress that can contribute to the hormonal cascade leading to bolting. Lettuce offers us a gentle reminder about our own boundaries. How often do we remain inside environments that are simply too hot for our souls? Maybe it is a high-pressure workplace, a toxic relationship, a relentless schedule that leaves us dry, exhausted, and emotionally parched. Yet we keep pushing, we keep smiling, we keep producing. And when we finally exceed our natural limits, we bolt too. We enter a frantic survival mode, trying to accomplish everything at once, while something inside us becomes increasingly bitter. We lose tenderness. We lose patience. We lose the ability to connect with the people around us. We become reactive, dry, and hard. And the lettuce whispers, "Know your temperature." Admitting that you cannot tolerate endless heat is not weakness. Sometimes it is one of the clearest signs of self-awareness. Step into the shade, water your soul, protect the boundaries that allow you to remain sweet, crisp, and whole. Where are you currently pushing beyond your own temperature limit? And what would it look like to gently step into the shade before you bolt? 8. Mache, the grace of humbly staying low. Our eighth crop is an old and increasingly uncommon secret, yet it may be the true king of winter survival. Mache, also known as corn salad or lamb's lettuce. Mache is a tiny, unassuming plant. It does not tower upward like kale or stretch across the ground like squash. Instead, it forms small, tight rosettes of soft, rounded green leaves that remain close to the surface of the soil. Because it stays so low, Mache can be almost invisible among the dramatic growth of a summer garden. Then winter comes. Temperatures plunge towards 0 degrees Fahrenheit, around -17 degrees Celsius, and other leafy vegetables collapse, darken, and disappear beneath the cold. But Mache remains. It does not seem intimidated by sub-zero wind. It does not surrender beneath heavy snow. Instead, it rests quietly under that white blanket, alive, vibrant, and astonishingly green, waiting for you to brush away the ice and cut those sweet, nutty, buttery rosettes from the soil. Its English name, corn salad, comes from its history of growing wild among the harvested stubble of European cornfields, where it provided valuable winter food for peasant farmers when little else remained. But growing Mache requires patience. It hates heat. Sow it while the soil remains warm, and germination can be poor, followed by rapid bolting. Mache waits for the cool, moist soil of mid to late September before it truly wants to wake. And even then, it grows slowly, almost invisibly at first, devoting its energy to remaining low and holding tightly to the earth. Mache teaches us about the quiet grace of humility. We live in a world constantly fighting for attention. We are told that success means standing taller, speaking louder, climbing higher, and making sure everyone can see us. We become fascinated with outward signs of stature, wealth, influence, and importance. But when the great storms of life finally arrive, the sudden shocks, personal losses, and larger crises, it is often the tallest and most exposed structures that crack first. Sometimes, it is the humble who survive. Those willing to stay close to the earth, those who remain rooted in the quiet beauty of what is directly around them, those who preserve their integrity even when no one is watching and the world has gone dark. You do not need to become a giant to survive the storm. Sometimes the most heroic thing you can do is remain quietly green beneath the snow. In what part of your life might you find greater peace by releasing the need to appear big, important, or prominent, and embracing instead the quiet strength of staying humble and low? 9. Broccoli, the legacy of prepared beginnings. Our ninth crop offers a lesson in timing and in the sacred value of preparation. Broccoli. Broccoli is one of the heavy hitters of the cool season garden, prized for its sweet, nutrient-dense heads that become even sweeter after a light frost. But if you wait until September and then direct sow broccoli seed into the ground, you may already be setting yourself up for disappointment. By September, daylight is disappearing rapidly. A newly planted seed can spend its first weeks simply trying to survive the remaining late summer heat. And by the time that young plant is finally ready for vigorous growth, the Persephone period may already be approaching, slowing growth before a proper head has time to develop. Then spring returns, and that undersized plant can quickly bolt, sending up a small yellow flower where you had imagined a magnificent broccoli head. A sad reminder of a beginning that came only a few weeks too late. That is why magnificent fall broccoli begins with transplants. Healthy seedlings roughly 4 to 6 weeks old, started carefully indoors or purchased from a local nursery. Set those transplants into the garden in September, and you give the plants an enormous head start. They already possess a developed root system. They already carry a strong canopy of leaves. Instead of spending September merely becoming seedlings, they can use the remaining warmth in the soil to establish deeper roots and build the structure they will need before serious cold arrives. And when planting them, spacing matters. Set the transplant at the proper depth, level with the top of its root ball, and allow at least 1.5 feet between plants. A broccoli seedling may appear tiny when it first enters the bed, but a mature broccoli plant becomes a large and demanding presence. Crowd those plants together, and they compete intensely for nutrients, producing smaller heads. Broccoli reminds us that some of the most beautiful achievements in our lives cannot simply be rushed from seed during the middle of a transition. They need a history. They need preparation. They need a nursery phase, a protected season where we study, practice, develop our character, and quietly gather strength. When life finally calls us into a major role, an important relationship, or an enormous project, we cannot always expect to begin from absolute zero and succeed overnight. We need the roots we developed yesterday. We need the preparation created by our past. And when we finally step into that larger space, we must also allow ourselves enough room to grow. Do not crowd your future with habits that belong to a smaller version of yourself. Plant yourself deeply into the rich soil of your experience. Give yourself room, and trust the preparation that brought you here. What nursery phase are you living through right now, and how might you honor this quiet period of preparation for the larger seasons still ahead? 10. Peas, the beauty of symbiosis and the rejection of excess. Our 10th crop gives us a masterclass in cooperation and a warning about excess. Peas. For gardeners in Zone 8 and warmer climates, September can be a spectacular window for planting a fall crop of English peas, snow peas, or sugar snaps. Peas love the soft, cool light of autumn and perform best when temperatures remain between roughly 60 and 75 degrees Fahrenheit. But the most remarkable thing about peas may be happening where we cannot easily see it: underground. Peas belong to the legume family, and they have developed a beautiful symbiotic relationship with a particular group of soil bacteria called rhizobium. When a pea begins growing, these bacteria enter into a partnership with its roots, forming tiny, rounded nodules. They do not harm the plant. Instead, the bacteria become microscopic nitrogen factories. They take nitrogen gas from the air spaces within the soil and chemically transform it into ammonium, a valuable nutrient the pea can absorb and use to build stems and leaves. And the pea gives something back. Through photosynthesis, the leaves manufacture sugars that help feed the bacteria living around its roots. It is an extraordinary exchange, a quiet, self-sustaining partnership built around mutual survival. And because of that partnership, peas teach an important lesson about fertilizer. A well-meaning gardener may assume that pouring high nitrogen fertilizer onto a pea bed will produce stronger plants. But instead, too much easily available nitrogen can disrupt the balance. The pea senses that nitrogen is already abundant in the soil and reduces its dependence on the partnership with rhizobium. Those nodules begin to lose their importance. Meanwhile, the plant uses all that excess nitrogen to produce tremendous amounts of lush, dark green foliage and enormous vines. But flowers may become scarce. The gardener can end up staring at an impressive jungle of green growth while finding very few peas to harvest. Peas warn us about the seductive danger of easy, artificial excess. In our own lives, we often chase quick rewards. We want the high nitrogen shortcut to success, a sudden windfall of wealth, a rapid increase in status, instant validation from social media. We want the lush foliage without the slow, deep relationships that support meaningful growth. But when we become dependent on easy external abundance, we risk losing our own symbiosis. We disconnect from community, from friendship, from the ancient values and relationships that keep us rooted. We may grow tall and impressive on the outside, while failing to produce the fruit that truly matters. The deep character, lasting love, and meaningful contributions that nourish the people around us. True abundance is built through mutual support, through symbiotic relationships, and through the wisdom to reject shortcuts when those shortcuts would cost us something deeper. Where in your life might you be relying on a kind of artificial fertilizer when what you actually need is a slower, more meaningful partnership with the people around you? 11. Tomatoes, the spring of the South, and the power of deep planting. Now let us look across the equator toward our fellow gardeners in the Southern Hemisphere, in South Africa, Australia, South America, and beyond, where September does not represent the twilight of the year. There, September is the glorious awakening of spring, and for you, September belongs to the tomato. Few vegetables capture the heart of the home gardener quite like tomatoes. They are symbols of summer happiness, of juicy abundance warmed directly by the sun. But tomatoes are extremely sensitive to cold, which means seedlings should not enter the garden until soil temperatures reach at least 60 to 65 degrees Fahrenheit. And when the time finally arrives to transplant them, there is a famous professional technique that can look completely wrong the first time you see it. Bury them deep. Tomato plants possess an extraordinary anatomical ability. Along their green stems are tiny hair-like bumps. Place part of that stem beneath warm, dark soil, and those bumps can undergo a transformation. They develop into adventitious roots, new roots emerging directly from the buried stem and anchoring themselves into the surrounding earth. So imagine you have a tomato seedling that has become tall, leggy, and weak while waiting in its container. You do not have to plant that entire stem upright and exposed. Instead, dig a deep hole or create a long, shallow trench. Remove the lowest leaves, lay the seedling down, and bury much of that elongated stem beneath the soil, leaving only the upper portion of healthy green growth exposed above the surface. Within days, that buried stem can begin changing. A dense new network of roots starts developing along the portion hidden beneath the earth. Instead of remaining a weak, top-heavy plant vulnerable to the first strong wind, the tomato can become a solid, grounded giant, supported by a much larger root system. That expanded network gives the plant greater access to water and nutrients held within the soil, allowing it to stand through the hot storms of summer. And the tomato teaches us something beautiful about the redemptive power of being buried. At some point in our lives, many of us enter a season where circumstances feel overwhelming. We lose a job, our health fails, our hearts break, our plans collapse. Suddenly, it feels as though life has thrown us into a dark trench and covered us with soil. We feel buried by circumstances beyond our control. But from that horizontal trench, the tomato whispers, "This is not your grave. This is your foundation. If you do not panic, if you endure the darkness and remain alive, you may discover that the very pieces of your history that once felt buried, your pain, your mistakes, your awkward struggles, can develop roots of their own. They can become anchors. They can become the very foundation that makes you stronger, more resilient, and more deeply wise. You can emerge from that trench not weakened, but strengthened, ready to bear fruit that nourishes the people around you. What buried season from your own past has ultimately become one of the strongest roots, supporting the person you are today? 12. Zucchini, the tragic grace of the male flower. Our final crop takes us once more to the spring gardens of the Southern Hemisphere and offers a lesson in patience, trust, and the natural order of things. Zucchini. Zucchini is a fast-growing, sprawling summer squash that loves the warmth arriving with September spring. It is famous for extraordinary abundance. Once mature, a healthy zucchini plant can produce so many long green fruits that gardeners joke about secretly leaving the extras on their neighbors' doorsteps at night just to get rid of them. But when beginning gardeners plant their first zucchini seed, they can experience an unexpected and heartbreaking disappointment. The plant looks wonderful. Huge umbrella-like leaves spread outward. Large yellow flowers begin opening. Everything appears perfect. And then, after a few days, those beautiful flowers wither, fall from the vine, and lie on the ground without producing a single zucchini. Panic begins. The gardener assumes the plant must be diseased, sterile, perhaps completely incapable of producing fruit. But once you understand the biology of zucchini, you can relax. Zucchini is monoecious, meaning one plant produces separate male and female flowers, and the plant tends to follow an ancient natural sequence. Its earliest flowers are often male. Those male blossoms have a very specific purpose. They advertise. They rise on long, slender stems, carrying nectar and golden pollen, attracting local bees, and showing those pollinators exactly where the plant is located. They begin establishing a reliable pollination route. But male flowers do not possess an ovary. That means they can never become zucchini fruit themselves. Their destiny is simply to open, call in the bees, complete their purpose, and then fall quietly to the earth. Later, after the pollinators have begun regularly visiting the plant, female flowers start appearing. They are easy to recognize because beneath each blossom sits what looks like a tiny green zucchini. When those female flowers finally open, the bees already know the route. They carry pollen from the male blossoms to the female flowers, allowing the harvest to begin. Zucchini gives us a gentle lesson about the necessity of early failures. We live in a world demanding immediate results. Start a new business, a creative project, or a journey of personal growth, and we often expect our first effort to produce lasting fruit. Then our earliest attempts wither. They fall. They seem to produce nothing except silence, and we immediately lose courage. We tell ourselves that we are not talented enough, not intelligent enough, not capable enough, and sometimes we quit before the real harvest has even begun. But the zucchini whispers, those were only your male flowers. Your early efforts that seemed unproductive were not necessarily failures. They were your advertisements to the world, your practice runs, your way of establishing the pollination highways of your mind, your work, and your craft. They were necessary steps, teaching you how to appear, how to attract opportunity, and how to prepare the environment for what would come later. Do not mourn every blossom that fell to the earth. It completed its purpose. The fruit may still be on its way. What blossoms have recently fallen from your own life that you interpreted as failures, but which may actually have been preparing the path toward your real harvest? The symphony of transition. Look at this beautiful patch of earth. 12 crops, 12 different biological stories written in the language of roots, leaves, sugars, and soil. When we look across a September garden, we are not simply looking at a random collection of plants. We are witnessing a vast, interconnected symphony of survival. Living evidence that the earth is always working, always transforming, and always hoping. Whether you are in the north, tucking garlic into cooling soil and waiting for winter's freeze, or in the south, burying tomato stems deep into warming spring earth, as they prepare for summer sunlight, you are participating in something sacred. You are declaring your faith in tomorrow, because that is what a gardener truly is. A gardener is someone who believes in the future. To plant a seed is to believe in a tomorrow you cannot yet see. It is to trust that dark and silent soil can take something small, simple, and buried and transform it into something beautiful, nourishing, and magnificent. And perhaps that is the greatest lesson of all. Our lives are not so different from these garden beds. We also move through transitions of light and darkness. We also experience the pain of thinning, the frustration of dormancy, the sting of frost, the disappointment of blossoms that fall before producing fruit. But if we learn to listen to the soil, and if we learn to align ourselves with the natural rhythms of our own seasons, perhaps we begin to understand that there can be purpose within every cold wind, sweetness hidden inside every struggle, and profound strength growing quietly beneath the experience of being buried. So as we step into this beautiful month of September, I want to leave you with one final question. What seed are you going to plant in the soil of your soul today? Will it be the patience of garlic, the sweetness of carrots, the boundaries of lettuce, or the deep, redeeming trust of the buried tomato? Whatever you choose, plant it with hope, plant it with love, and allow the earth to do the rest. Thank you for walking through the garden with me today, here on Earthly Delights. If this journey brought a little warmth to your heart or a little wisdom to your mind, subscribe to the channel, leave a comment below and tell me what you are planting this month, and share this video with someone who may be navigating a winter of their own. Until next time, keep your hands in the dirt, keep your eyes on the stars, and remember, you are growing too. I'll see you in the next season.